everyone, Ian from Proline here with our new tool drive twin I-beam pre-runner suspension conversion kit for SCX10 and 10.2. We're going to be installing it on a SCX10 chassis. This started out as the deadbolt, but we're going to be turning into a pre-runner. Tools needed is a 7mm driver for the wheel hex, 5.5mm driver, got two, 1.5mm, got some flush cuts, shock pliers, X-Acto knife, and to speed things up, we've got a 2mm driver adapter for our power driver here. And then finally, we'll be needing a set of needle nose pliers. Before we even get anything started, we're going to go ahead and start disassembling this car and getting the chassis ready to install it. I'm going to go ahead and take these the tires off. All right, now that we have the tires off, we're going to focus on the front. So we'll be reusing some of these parts, so we're starting with the knuckles. Now to be sure to set this hardware in a safe place because we'll be reusing these screws later. Right, now we'll be removing the steering linkage from the knuckle. And setting this knuckle aside. And then same thing on the other side. Now we'll be removing the front axle from the chassis. Starting with the skid screws right here and here. All right, now we're gonna grab our needle nose pliers and remove this top link right here. Setting that hardware aside. So now we're removing the screw right here and we'll be pulling the shock off the front axle. And then the final screw for the front axle is going to be this pan hard mount right here. I'm going to go ahead and remove that. Now the front axle is ready to be removed. Go ahead and set this to the side. We will not be using it later. Let's pull off this drag link right here from the servo horn. Flip the chassis back over and remove the shocks. The final step to the front end is we'll be removing the stock shock towers. All right, then we have lastly 4 screws to remove and then we'll be wrapped up with the front. It'll be here, here, and the same on the other side. And with that, the front end is now ready for the beam kit. Moving on to the rear. Same thing as the front, we'll be removing these lower links from this skid plate right here. Then also these lower links will be removed from the axle. And the links are free. And we're removing the screws from this chassis brace where the shock towers mount. And in order to get this chassis brace out, where the battery mount will go later, we'll need to pull the screw from this to be able to flex the chassis out of the way. And we're going to go ahead and throw that screw right back in so we don't misplace it. The rear is now ready for the beam kit. And since this is a two-wheel drive conversion, we're going to be removing the front drive shaft from the transmission. Now that the chassis is fully disassembled, we're going to set off to the side and start working on the steering knuckles. So we'll be pulling the dog bones out, so we need to start with removing the wheel hexes. And that'll be the 1.5 mil driver. Just a couple turns, and that pops off. Removing this pin and being careful not to lose it. And then pushing out this dog cup. Dog bone. Cup. Cup, yeah, dog cup. And then same thing with the other side. And there we are. All right, so let's get into this kit. So right away when we open the box, we have a QR code right here. You can scan, it'll bring you to the product page. That'll have a PDF instruction manual. There's two main bags. We have the front section and the rear section. But for now, we're gonna be focusing on the front. The replacement axle is gonna be located in the front bag. We're gonna go ahead and open that up. And we're gonna go ahead and go in bag F, where all the hardware is. And then here are our new axles. So this side, it's going to get inserted into the knuckle, just like the dog bone was removed, or the cup was removed. I don't know what those are called. It's going to go in the same way that the axle was removed. Push this in here. We're going to reinstall this pin. And finally, our wheel hex is going to go right on top, and we'll snug that down. And then we'll do the same thing again. And all set. Push those to the side. So now we're moving on to bag A. We'll be assembling the beam arms. So I'm going to grab our 3x14 screws. Start with our passenger side. And when they're assembled, they're going to look something like this. I'll grab the screw and insert it in here. And do the same thing with the other arms. Next, we're going to grab our pivot balls. Should be 4. Now, while you can put these balls in the arms with needle pliers, we're going to go ahead and use our pivot ball inserting tool on our shock pliers. Doesn't matter which direction these go into either. There's the front. And the rear. And same thing for the other arm set. And we're done with the beam arms for now. Next, we're going to be assembling the steering linkage. So we have the bag E and bag D. So now I'm going to take all of our rod ends and insert the stainless steel pivot balls. with our shock shaft pliers. All right, that's the last rod end. Now we're going to be putting those rod ends onto our steering linkage. Now, one end is going to be a reverse thread. The standard thread size has a little line across this rounded spot. So we're going to go ahead and start with that side. I'm going to hold the link in our pliers and just start this by hand. And now that I got this started by hand, I'm going to go ahead and take our 2mm driver and insert it through the ball end. And we're just going to go ahead and spin those on to make it a little easier on ourselves. We're not going to go too tight, we're just going to snug it up. And then same thing on the other side. Just this time it'll be reverse thread. And we want these rod ends to be perpendicular to each other. So one being flat while the other is vertical. And we're going to do the same thing for the rest of the 3 links. All right, now on this link, it's a little different than the others. It doesn't have these flat spots right here. So we're not going to be snugging it all the way down. We're going to having like 1 or 2 threads exposed on here. This is the tie rod. All right, so that's all 4 links. This is the drag link. The rod ends are going to be perpendicular. On the tie rod, the rod ends are going to be parallel, but not snugged all the way down with a couple of threads exposed. And in our 2 steering links, both rod ends will be perpendicular. Now we're ready to throw the steering links onto the knuckles. So we're going to need these spacers. So we have these 6mm spacers and 3x27 screws. And then finally, M3 lock nuts. So we're gonna grab our steering links, put the screw through. These rod ends are gonna be going on the bottom of the knuckle, just like this. So we're gonna get the thread started. Use our driver. We're gonna thread it in until we just see the thread start to pop up right here. We're gonna grab our spacer and pop that in there, just like that. Go through until we see the threads start to pop up. Grab our lock nut. Give it a little bit of a turn. And grab our 5.5mm nut wrench. And hold both of those. And then give it a little turn to snug it down. And this side's complete. We're going to do the same thing for the other side. And with that, both knuckle assemblies are ready to go on the beam arms. So we're going to go ahead and grab those beam arms. And we're going to lay them out like so. And this is the passenger side and the driver's side. We're going to grab those screws we set aside from earlier, our knuckle screws, and install the knuckles onto the beam arms, like so. You don't want to tighten these too much, we want them to be just snug. Do the same thing on the bottom. And then same thing for the remaining arm. And to make sure you didn't over tighten them, just go ahead and give these a wiggle and make sure there isn't too much resistance. And we're good to go. Let's go ahead and set these to the side. Next we'll be assembling the shock towers and swing set. We have bag B and bag C. We'll start with bag B. And then go ahead and open up bag C. Then here we have the components for the swing set and the hinge pin. For the driver's side, we have these two components. And then for our passenger side, we have these three components that are going to go together like this. And each side is going to have this forward mounting bracket, and both have pivot pins. All right, we're going to go ahead and put these pieces all together. We're going to grab our 3x20 flathead screw. And insert it right here. And we want this snug but not too tight. And assemble the other swing set. And those two swing sets are ready for the steering links. All right, now we're going to go ahead and grab our beam arms, and we're putting the links onto the swing set. All right, we're going to start with this swing set that only has 2 link spots, and we're going to put our steering link from our passenger side beam set into the slot that is towards the rear. All right, slide in like that, and we're going to grab our 3x18 screw, insert it like so, and then we're going to go ahead and tighten it down. The next link we'll be grabbing is the tie rod. Insert like so, and then another 3x18 screw. And for the last swing set, we have our passenger side. And you can tell it's this way because of the really open slot right here, which will fit 3 rod ends. We're going to grab our 3x30 button head screw, and we're going to start it into the thinner side. We're going to get this started and thread it most of the way in to make it easier to install the links. So we're going to go as far as we can while still being able to slide the rod ends over. So for our first link, we're going to grab the tie rod, which is connected to the other swing set, and slide that on. Next will be the drag link, which connects to the servo. And finally, we have the driver's side steering link. And we're going to hold all 3 of those together and send the screw the rest of the way home. And just snug it down. And this assembly is complete. And we're going to set it to the side and grab our chassis. All right, now that we have our chassis, we're going to be installing our shock towers. We're going to start with the passenger side. And here we have our 3x10 countersunk screws. We're going to grab our chassis, and this one is going to go just like this. We'll grab our screws and just set them in place, make it a little easier. Make sure we're in the hole. And then use our driver and tighten them in. All right, now that's tight, we're going to go to the other side. And same thing as the other side. Grab our shock tower, set it in place here, and insert our screws. All right, now that we have the shock towers on, we're ready to install the steering linkage. We're going to slide this underneath our chassis. Just like so. Set it right here. We're going to grab our hinge pins and put them into these slots right here on both sides. And then slide the swing sets over the pins. And then set that down. Next, we're going to grab these two mounts. Put those on the frame right here on both sides. And we're going to grab our bumper mount that we had set aside from before and slide that into the frame. And then here's our 3x14 flathead screw hardware. That hardware is going to go into these two holes on both sides. We're going to hold it so it doesn't fall apart. And snug it down. All right, now that those are tight, we're going to flip the chassis over. We're going to take our drag link. We're going to take a 3x10 screw and screw our drag link into the servo horn. All right, our steering is now fully mounted. Next, we're going to move on to mounting the beam arms. We'll start with the passenger side and insert it into these two ears right here. And we're going to take two 3x14 screws and screw these beam arms in place. All right, we're just going to snug that down. Do the same thing on the other side. All right, and for the other arm, we're going to feed this beam arm between the steering link and the other beam arm and put them between the two ears and take our other 3x14 screw and screw everything together. The final step for mounting the beam arms is inserting them into these slots here where the original lower links went. And we're going to reuse the stock hardware that we set aside earlier. We're going to flip this over to install the shocks. For the first shock, we're going to install into the forwardmost hole. And then for the lower point, it's going to mount in front of the beam arm right here on this ear. All right, there's that side. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And on the driver's side, we'll be mounting this lower end behind the beam arm. And that completes the install of the front. All right, now that we're finished with the front, we're going to set the chassis back aside and grab more components out of the box. All right, now we're moving on to the rear. So we're going to go ahead and open up the rear bag. We'll be opening rear A, which has the trailing arms and the new battery mount. All right, we're going to grab our chassis and flip it upside down. We'll be installing the battery mount next. The screw we pulled out earlier to be able to flex the frame, we're going to be removing that again. All right, so we'll be installing the battery tray just like this. We'll pull apart the frame and pop the mounting tabs between the frame rails. This mount right here is going to go towards the furthest forward hole right here. And then we're going to go ahead and reinstall this screw into the rear bumper mount. Not too tight and just snug. Now we're ready to flip the chassis back over. We're going to cut into our hardware bag labeled rear C. And And we're gonna want 4 3x10 flathead screws. There's gonna be 2 screws per shock tower. And they're gonna mount on the chassis, with the front one being in the furthest forward mounting hole. Just like this. I'm gonna try to line those holes up before we put the screw in. And then go ahead and send her home. And just snug so we can get the other screw in. Just gonna go right behind that. And then just snug it down. And then the same thing for the other side. All right, shock towers are mounted, and we just have 2 final 3x14 screws to install into the battery mount. And the screw is going to go 2 holes behind the rear part of the shock tower. Same thing on the other side. And the battery mount's complete. I'm going to flip the chassis over and remove the shocks from the axle. Now that we have those removed, we're going to set the chassis aside and assemble the rod ends into our trailing arms. We're going to grab our rod end install tool. Same thing as with the steering links. Just hold them in place and then press them in. We're going to do both of these flat spots on the same side, and on the other link, we're going to do them on the opposite side. So both those flat spots are on this side. So with this link, we're going to do them on the other side. And making sure to get the flat spot on the same side. And there we are. Bring our chassis back. I'm going to grab the bag with the 3 and 6 millimeter spacers. We're going to grab 2 3 millimeter and 2 6 millimeter spacers. And be left with 4 3 millimeter spacers in this bag. But we're going to set that to the side for now. Then we're going to grab our 3x25 screws. So with the link that has the flat spot on the rod end facing towards the outside of the chassis, we're going to put our screw through on the flat side, a 3 millimeter spacer, and that's going to go into the lower link mount of the axle. And we're going to get that thread started. And I want to screw the screw in far enough to where the threads just start to peek out of the mount. And that'll help us hold the spacer in place when we screw the screw the rest of the way. So after we have the 6 millimeter spacer in place right there, we're going to send the screw all the way in. And just snug it down. And repeat that process on the other side. And then once again, you want the flat side on the outside of the chassis. All right, the links are now installed into the axle. And we're going to pull a few screws off of the chassis. We're going to pull the upper link mounting screw, and then the 2 skid plate mounting screws. And the screw in the front is going to hold these in place, so you don't have to worry about these falling off. We're going to remove the same screws on the other side. Next, we're going to grab bag B, which is the chassis trailing arm mounting brackets. So the piece that is orientated like this is going to go on the driver's side of the chassis, and the piece that is orientated like this with the extra boss on the side is going to go towards the inside of the chassis. We're going to pair these two together, and these 2 remaining pieces are going to go on the other side so we don't get them mixed up. We're going to grab our bag of 3x14 hardware. And go ahead and just dump that out. Our bag of 3x20 hardware. Set that right here. And then our 3x40 screws. We'll set those out as well. And finally, we're going to take the remaining 3mm spacers, and then we're going to pull 2 M3 nylon lock nuts out, and then set the bag to the side for now. Put those right here. So we're going to start with this screw, the 3x14, and that's going to go into the running board right here. We're going to go ahead and just snug that up. Next, we're going to grab another 3x14 and our lock nut. That's going to go where the upper link mount for the forward axle was. We're going to get this started just by hand. Just so that lock nut holds in place. And once it starts spinning, we'll grab our needle nose pliers, hold that lock nut in place, and tighten it the rest of the way. Next, we're going to grab the outer bracket of the mount, set it right there. Grab another 3x14 button head screw. That's going to go right here. And we're just going to tighten that down. The final screw holding this mount to the chassis is a 3x40. That's going to go in the rearmost part of the mount. Now, while inserting the screw, make sure your upper link is in the skid plate right here. Next, we're going to be installing the trailing arm into the bracket. There's 3 different holes for different wheelbase options, but since we're just going with the standard wheelbase, we're going to be using the middle hole. We'll be grabbing our 3x20 screw, inserting into the hole slightly. Next, we'll have a 3mm spacer. Just going to go right on top. We're going to hold it just like that. Get the link on. Move the screw forward so it doesn't move around. And then insert the last 3mm spacer. And then there it is. We're in. A couple threads in. And then tighten it the rest of the way. All right, the trailing arm is fully mounted to the chassis, so we're going to repeat these steps on the other side. All right, and that completes mounting the trailing arms to the chassis. We're going to flip it over and install the shocks to the trailing arms. We're going to grab our 3x16 hardware and the remaining 2 M3 nylon lock nuts. We're going to insert the shock into the rearmost hole and feed the screw through. All right, we're going to flip it over so we can install the lock nut. We're going to get it started by hand and then finish with the tool. All right, we're using the 5.5mm nut tool. And we're just snugging that down. We don't want to crush it. We're going to install the shock on the other side now. And that completes the installation of the beam kit. So I've included extra mounting points on our linkage to install a secondary bypass shock for the full-scale pre-runner look. And we're going to go ahead and install these now. Now, since the faux reservoir is towards the back, I'm going to take this screw out and flip it around so we have room for the secondary shock. And using our big bore scalar shock really completes the look. And now that we've completed the suspension install, we're going to put on the wheels and tires. Then to be able to mount the body, we're going to pull the body post from the stock shock towers with a 2mm driver, and we're going to reuse this hardware. This shock tower has the same exact body post location, so you won't have to drill new holes into your body either. All right, now that our body posts are installed, we're ready to throw on a body. And for the sake of time, we won't be drilling any body mounting holes on here, but this is just an example of how the 2015 Chevy pre-runner body really just completes that true scale desert racing look. So if you're ready to transform the look of your SCX10 1 or 2 into the ultimate two-wheel drive desert racer, be sure to pick up this pre-runner body or our beam kit at ProLineRacing.com. So if you like that video, be sure to give us a thumbs up, comment, subscribe, and check the bell for notifications on future videos. For this product and others like it, be sure to head to ProLineRacing.com. And I'll see you on the trail.